An October morning in Ridgewood greeted the Perez family with its usual bustle. In a two-story house on Maple Street, in a quiet suburban neighborhood, an alarm clock rang at 6 in the morning. Nancy Perez was already standing at the coffee maker, preparing breakfast before her morning shift at St. Mary's Hospital. At 42, she still looked attractive, the slim figure of a nurse who spent 12 hours a day on her feet, her chestnut hair pulled back into a practical ponytail, and her tired but kind brown eyes. 3 years ago, she believed she had found happiness with Ross. After a painful divorce from Amanda's father, life seemed to be getting back on track. "Morning, honey," Ross muttered as he descended the creaky stairs. At 45, he had retained the sturdy build of a mechanic, broad shoulders, calloused hands, and a light stubble. Working at Jimmy's auto service required physical strength, and Ross was proud that he could lift any engine. "Coffee's ready." Nancy offered her cheek for the traditional morning kiss, but noticed Ross's gaze slip past her to the staircase, where the sound of a shower could be heard from upstairs. Amanda was getting ready for class at Ridgewood Community College. The 19-year-old was studying psychology, dreaming of becoming a family counselor. Tall and slender, with long blonde hair and her father's blue eyes, she had inherited Nancy's determination and kindness. "Will she be back late tonight?" Ross asked, pouring coffee. His tone was casual, but Nancy sensed something else. Interest. Too much interest. "She has a developmental psychology study group until 7. Why?" "Just curious." Ross shrugged, but continued to listen to the sounds upstairs. Nancy had noticed these moments over the past few months. The looks that lingered too long, the questions about Amanda's schedule, the accidental touches on her shoulder that lasted a second longer than they should have. At first, she dismissed it as her own paranoia. After all, Ross was a good stepfather. He had helped Amanda get into college, supported her financially, and even given her a used Honda Civic for her 18th birthday. "Hi, Mom." Amanda appeared in the kitchen wearing jeans and a sweater, her backpack slung over her shoulder. "Hi, Ross." She always called him by his first name, not Dad or Stepdad. It had been their unspoken agreement from the beginning. "Morning, beautiful." Ross smiled, and Nancy felt that strange tension again. "How's college?" "Fine. We have an important test in child psychology today." Amanda took an apple from the vase, avoiding direct eye contact with her stepfather. "Child psychology, huh?" Ross moved closer. "Interesting. What exactly are you studying?" "Ross, let the girl eat her breakfast in peace," Nancy interjected, sensing her daughter's discomfort. "I'm just interested in my stepdaughter's education," Ross said defensively. "Is that wrong?" Amanda quickly swallowed her coffee and headed for the door. "I have to go. See you tonight." "Be careful on the roads," Nancy called after her, but her daughter had already slammed the door shut. The kitchen was plunged into a tense silence. Ross finished his coffee, studying his phone while Nancy packed her medical bag. Mornings used to be filled with light chatter about plans for the day, small-town news, jokes. Now it was as if a wall had grown between them. "Nance," Ross looked up from his screen. "Are we okay?" "What do you mean?" "Well, you've been kind of cold lately, distant." Nancy stopped at the door, her hand on the handle. How could she explain to her husband that she was afraid of her own suspicions, that she lay awake at night analyzing every look he gave their daughter, every accidental touch? "I'm just tired. It's a difficult time at the hospital right now. Maybe we should spend the weekend together? Just the two of us. We could go to Silver Lake like we used to." The offer sounded sincere, but Nancy noticed that he had suggested the trip just after finding out that Amanda would be out all evening. "We'll see." She kissed him on the cheek and left. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital took 15 minutes through the center of Ridgewood. The town was waking up. Stores were opening. Children were going to school. Workers were heading to the factories. Nancy loved Ridgewood for its rhythm and predictability. Everyone knew their neighbors, crime was low, and the loudest news was the results of the local school football games. The usual chaos awaited her at the hospital. As the senior nurse in the emergency room, Nancy coordinated the work of the junior staff, worked with patients, and assisted the doctors. The job required complete concentration, But today, her thoughts kept returning home. "Nancy, are you okay?" Dr. Michael Grant, the head of the department, noticed her distraction. At 50, he was an experienced doctor with a reputation as the best diagnostician in town. They had worked together for 7 years, and he knew her well enough. "Just family stuff," she tried to smile. "Want to talk about it?" Nancy hesitated. Dr. Grant was more than just a colleague. Over the years, they had become friends. He knew about her divorce, about the difficulties of raising a daughter on her own, about her relationship with Ross. But how could she tell him about her suspicions, which might turn out to be figments of her imagination? "Maybe later," she said, turning back to her computer. The day passed in the usual hustle and bustle, but by evening her anxiety had only grown. Nancy knew that Amanda would be staying late at college, which meant she would be home alone with Ross. It used to be a pleasant prospect. Now it was unsettling. When she got home at 6:30, she found Ross in the living room. He was watching the news, but the TV was off. He was holding a photo, Amanda's school portrait. "What are you doing?" Nancy's voice sounded sharper than she intended. Ross flinched and quickly put the photo back in its place. "Nothing much, just thinking about how fast she's grown." "Ross, we need to talk." He turned to her, and something like fear flashed in his eyes. "About what?" "About your behavior, about the way you look at Amanda." The air in the room grew thick. Ross slowly rose from the sofa, his face taking on a defensive expression. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You do." Nancy took a step forward. "I'm not blind, Ross. The looks, the touches, the questions about her schedule. It's not right." "Are you seriously accusing me of—" He didn't finish his sentence. "I'm saying what I see, and what I see I don't like." They stared at each other in silence for a few seconds. Then Ross took a deep breath and moved closer. "Nancy, you're my wife. Amanda is your daughter. I love you both. If my behavior seemed wrong, I apologize, but accusations—" "These aren't accusations," she interrupted him. "They're a warning. Amanda is my daughter, and I will protect her from anyone who tries to hurt her. Anyone." Something changed in Ross's eyes. The softness disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "I understand," he nodded. "I understand you very well." At that moment, the front door slammed shut. Amanda was back. The tension in the room dissipated instantly, but Nancy knew the conversation wasn't over. Something had changed between her and Ross. Something dangerous. "Hi!" Amanda peeked into the living room. "What's up? Why are you guys so serious?" "Everything's fine, sweetie." Nancy hugged her daughter. "How was your test?" While Amanda was talking about her classes, Nancy felt Ross's gaze on her. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at her daughter. And there was something in that look that made her blood run cold. The next 2 weeks passed in a stifling atmosphere of mistrust. Nancy watched Ross's every move, and he seemed to revel in her suspicion. The situation became unbearable on Saturday evening when Nancy returned home from an extra shift. The house greeted her with an unfamiliar silence. Usually by 7 o'clock in the evening, the kitchen was filled with the smells of dinner and the sounds of the television. Today there was dead silence. "Ross? Amanda?" she called, climbing the stairs. Muffled voices came from Amanda's bedroom. Nancy stopped at the half-open door, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Ross was sitting on the edge of her daughter's bed. Amanda stood by the window, hugging herself, her face a picture of confusion and fear. Something serious had clearly just happened between them. "You're a grown woman now," Ross said in a soft, almost hypnotic tone. "Your mother doesn't understand how much I care about you, about your future." "Ross, please stop." Amanda's voice trembled. "This isn't right." "What isn't right? That I want to help you? That I'm willing to give you more than any boy at your college?" Nancy pushed open the door and entered the room. "What's going on here?" Ross jumped up as if stung. Amanda rushed to her mother. "Mom, The girl couldn't find the words. "We were just talking." Ross tried to remain calm, but the red spots on his neck gave him away. "About what?" Nancy hugged her trembling daughter. "About her future, about college." "You're lying." Nancy felt anger rising inside her. "Amanda, what did he say to you?" The girl looked at her stepfather. then at her mother. He said he loves me, not as a daughter, in a different way. The world around Nancy spun. What? Nancy, you don't understand. Ross took a step forward. Don't come close to her! She screamed so loudly that Amanda flinched. Don't you dare come near her! She's an adult. She can make her own decisions. She's 19 years old. She's my daughter. And you're my husband. Ross smiled, and there was not a trace of remorse in that smile. Husband? When was the last time you were a real wife, Nancy? When was the last time you looked at me the way you look at your job? Get out of this house. Nancy's voice was icy. Now! This is my house, too. No! She grabbed the phone. This is my daughter's house, and if you don't get out right now, I'm calling the police. Ross looked at them both, his face contorted with anger and something else. Determination. Fine, he said slowly, heading for the door. But this isn't over, Nancy. Believe me, this is only the beginning. After he left, Amanda burst into tears in her mother's arms. Mom, I'm so ashamed. I didn't know what to do. He's been coming up to me for weeks, saying strange things. Why didn't you tell me? I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. He's your husband. Nancy hugged her daughter tighter. I'll always believe you. Always. It's not your fault. They sat up all night talking. Amanda told her about months of inappropriate attention, accidental touches, gifts she hadn't asked for, hints that he could give her a better life than any young man could. By morning, Nancy had made up her mind. She filed for divorce. The next few days were a nightmare. Ross didn't want to part amicably. He hired a lawyer who found ways to drag out the process. Worse, he started spreading rumors about Nancy's mental state, calling her paranoid and jealous. The situation came to a head 3 days later when Ross showed up at her hospital room. We need to talk, he said, intercepting her at the service entrance. I have nothing to say to you. Talk to my lawyer. Nancy, you're making a mistake. Amanda lied to you. She tried to walk past him, but he blocked her way. She came to me. She told me she was in love. Ask her. You're disgusting. I'm in love with her. And you know what? She feels the same way. Want me to show you the messages she sent me? Nancy slapped him across the face. The loud slap echoed off the hospital walls. Don't you ever come near my daughter again. Ross rubbed his cheek, his eyes narrowing. Or what? Or I'll tell everyone in this town what you are. Everyone who wants to listen. And who's going to believe you? A jealous wife who can't accept that a man chose a younger woman over her? At that moment, Nancy realized she was dealing with a man she didn't know at all. 3 years of marriage, and she hadn't seen the real Ross. Let's meet tonight, he said calmly. At Silver Lake, at 8. We need to discuss everything civilly. I won't. If you don't come, tomorrow morning Amanda will find some very compromising photos in her car. Fakes, of course, but very good ones. The threat was clear. Nancy nodded. Silver Lake was a 20-minute drive from the city. It was a popular spot for picnics and romantic encounters. Nancy and Ross had come here in the early months of their relationship. Now the place seemed sinister. Ross was already waiting on the shore when she arrived. The sun was setting, painting the water reddish hues. The place was deserted. No one came here on weekday evenings. Thanks for coming, he said, turning to her. Say what you want to say and get it over with. I want you to withdraw the divorce petition. Never. And that you convince Amanda to give us a chance. Nancy laughed, but there was no joy in her laughter. You seriously think I'll let you? I don't think you have a choice. He took out his phone and showed her the screen. It was a photo of Amanda sleeping in her room, taken through the window. I have a whole collection, and not just photos. Nausea rose in Nancy's throat. You've been watching her. I was protecting my interests. And if you don't cooperate, this material will appear on the internet. Imagine what that will do to her reputation, to her future. At that moment, something snapped in Nancy's mind. Years of pent-up rage, maternal protective instincts, disgust at what her marriage had become, all merged into a wave of fury. You sick bastard! She lunged at him. Ross was ready. He easily deflected her attack and grabbed her wrists. Calm down, he said, almost gently. There's no need to be dramatic. Let me go. I can't. "You see, Nancy, you know too much, and you're too stubborn to keep quiet." She tried to break free, but his grip was iron. "You're going to destroy the only thing that gives my life meaning. Amanda, I can't let that happen." He began to drag her toward the water. Nancy realized what he was doing and started to scream, but the lake was surrounded by woods, and the nearest houses were a mile away. "An accident," Ross muttered as he pulled her into the water. "She slipped on the wet rocks, hit her head, drowned." The cold lake water closed over her head. Ross held her under, ignoring her desperate attempts to break free. Her lungs burned, her consciousness began to cloud. "I'm sorry, Nancy." His voice sounded as if it were coming through cotton wool. "But Amanda will need comfort, and I'll be there for her." Darkness engulfed her. Dr. Michael Grant arrived at the lake half an hour after the emergency call. An anonymous caller reported a woman in the water. By the time he arrived, the police had cordoned off the scene, and Ross, wet and distraught, was giving a statement to Detective Sarah Mitchell. "I tried to save her," he sobbed. "She slipped and hit her head on the rocks. I dove in after her, but it was too late." Grant examined the body on the shore. There was no pulse, no breathing. But something about the position of the body, the nature of the injuries, seemed strange to him. Too many years in the emergency room had taught him to distinguish between accidents and something else. "I'll take her to the hospital," he told the detective, "for an official confirmation of death." "Of course, doctor." In the ambulance as they drove away from the lake, Grant checked her pulse again. It was weak, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Nancy was alive, albeit in critical condition. He made an instant decision. Instead of St. Mary's Hospital, he drove to his private clinic in a nearby town. Something about Ross's story didn't add up, and Nancy was his colleague and friend. He couldn't risk her life. He worked through the night at his clinic, fighting for Nancy's life. By morning, she was out of danger but still unconscious. Grant made another decision. No one was to know that she was alive. Not until he understood what had really happened at the lake. Official documents stated that Nancy Perez drowned in Silver Lake on November 15, 2019. Her body was cremated at the request of her family. Ross Perez became a widower and Amanda Thompson an orphan. But in a small private clinic 30 miles from Ridgewood, a woman named Alice Johnson slowly regained consciousness, planning her return from the dead. December 2019 to March 2020. The first months at Dr. Grant's clinic were a period of not only physical, but also psychological recovery for Nancy. The injuries from the drowning attempt were more serious than initially thought. Damaged lungs, concussion, hypothermia. But worst of all was the realization that she was dead to the world, including her own daughter. "You can't just come back," Dr. Grant explained to her during one of her sleepless nights. "Ross thinks he killed you. If you show up, he'll know he has to finish the job. And this time, he won't leave any witnesses." Michael Grant turned out to be not just a doctor, but a man with skeletons in his own closet. 20 years ago, his own sister was the victim of domestic violence. The police couldn't prove anything, and a month later, she committed suicide. Saving Nancy became his way of redemption. At his private clinic in the town of Hopton, 30 miles from Ridgewood, Nancy received new documents. Alice Johnson, 40, a nurse from Florida who moved to Ohio after her husband's death. Grant took care of every detail: credit history, medical records, even photos on social media. But the documents couldn't ease the pain of being separated from Amanda. "How is she?" Nancy asked every day. Grant carefully gathered information through mutual acquaintances at the hospital. The news was painful. Amanda dropped out of college after her mother's death. She blamed herself for what had happened, believing that if she had told someone about Ross's behavior earlier, the tragedy could have been avoided. "Ross is playing the role of the grief-stricken stepfather," Grant said. "He organized the memorial service and erected a monument. Everyone in town feels sorry for him." Summer 2028, months after the death, the news that Nancy feared most arrived. Ross had proposed to Amanda. She accepted. Dr. Grant couldn't hide the disgust in his voice. The wedding is set for the fall. Nancy spent that day in hysterics and the following week in a state of complete prostration. She understood the psychology of what was happening. Amanda, who had lost her mother and felt guilty, was clinging to the only person left from her former life. Ross was skillfully exploiting her vulnerability. "I have to stop this," she repeated. "How? If you show up now, it will destroy Amanda. She'll realize she's been mourning her mother for a year. It could break her completely." Grant was right, but that didn't make the pain any less acute. In September 2020, Ross Perez married Amanda Thompson in a small ceremony at St. Paul's Church in Ridgewood. The bride was 20 years old, the groom 46. Everyone said it was romantic, how love had helped them overcome their shared tragedy. Nancy looked at photos from the wedding on the internet and planned the murder. 2020 to 2022. The years of planning. Alice Johnson got a job as a nurse at a small clinic in Houghton. She rented a modest apartment, drove a used car, and led the quiet life of a middle-aged single woman. But she devoted all her free time to one goal: studying Ross and Amanda's new life. She learned his habits, his roots, his friends. She found out that his auto repair business had expanded. He now had 3 branches in the area. The insurance money from Nancy's death helped the business grow. The irony was bitter. Through Dr. Grant, she monitored Amanda's health. The girl had visited doctors several times with complaints of anxiety and depression. Ross always accompanied her to appointments, controlling her every word. Nancy studied the psychology of abusers, read about gaslighting, isolation, and emotional control. Everything she learned confirmed her worst fears. Ross was methodically destroying her daughter's personality, turning her into a dependent and submissive wife. In 2021, Amanda gave birth to a son. They named him Lucas. Photos of the happy family on social media told one story, but Nancy saw another. There was no longer any light in her daughter's eyes. "He's using the child as another way to control her," explained the psychologist Nancy consulted under the guise of working with difficult patients. Now Amanda has one more reason not to fight back. By the end of 2022, Nancy had completed the first phase of her plan. She had compiled a detailed dossier on Ross, his financial shenanigans. It turned out he was hiding income from the tax authorities, his connections to shady characters from the criminal underworld, and evidence of domestic violence. The latter became apparent when Amanda appeared in public with a black eye. Ross explained it away as an unfortunate fall down the stairs, but Nancy knew the truth. 2023. Time to return. By early 2023, Nancy's patience had run out. Amanda was 23 and little Lucas was 2. Every month of delay meant another month of suffering for her daughter. "I'm ready," she told Dr. Grant in January. "Are you sure?" There's no turning back. There's been no turning back for 4 years. The plan was complicated and required precision. First, she had to cast doubt on the accident story. To do this, Nancy prepared a package of anonymous evidence for the police. Photos of the accident scene pointing out inconsistencies in Ross's story, copies of his correspondence with Amanda prior to Nancy's death, and surveillance footage showing his strange behavior in the days following the tragedy. At the same time, she started a psychological war. Ross began receiving anonymous letters with quotes from conversations he considered confidential. Photos of him and Amanda with the caption, "I remember everything." Small but frightening reminders of the past. Someone knows. Ross began to get nervous. He installed new locks, surveillance cameras, and even hired a private investigator. But the ghost from the past remained elusive. In March 2023, Nancy took the next step. She got a job at St. Mary's Hospital in Ridgewood. Not in the emergency room, where she could be recognized, but in the administrative wing. Alice Johnson became the assistant chief accountant, an inconspicuous woman with glasses, short dark hair, and conservative clothing. The changes in her appearance were drastic. Plastic surgery changed the shape of her nose, colored contact lenses turned her brown eyes gray, and a special diet and exercise routine changed her figure. Even her voice sounded different. Years of training with a speech therapist had paid off. Working at the hospital, she gained access to the Perez family's medical records. What she discovered exceeded her worst fears. During her 3 years of marriage, Amanda had been to the doctor 13 times with injuries that could be explained by domestic violence. Broken ribs, bruises, sprains, always with plausible explanations and always accompanied by her caring husband. Little Lucas was also a victim. The pediatrician's records contained cautious notes about possible emotional stress and behavior atypical for his age. By the summer of 2023, Nancy realized that the time for subtle games was over. Ross was destroying the lives of her daughter and grandson every day. It was time to strike a decisive blow. But first, she had to make sure Amanda could survive it. Through social services, she anonymously reported signs of domestic violence in the Perez family. The visit from social services forced Ross to tone down his aggression for a while, but it also showed Nancy that her daughter wasn't ready to escape yet. She was protecting her husband, denying there was a problem, afraid of losing her son. Then, Nancy made her final decision. If the system couldn't protect her family, she would do it herself. Ross Perez had to die, and this time, no one would survive. In August 2023, she began the final phase of her plan. Soon, the ghost of Nancy Perez would return home to take back what was rightfully hers, her daughter, her grandson, and justice. For 4 years, a dead woman had been preparing for her resurrection and for revenge. September 2023, Detective Sarah Mitchell was sorting through the mail in her office at the Regency Police Department when she came across a thick envelope with no return address. Inside were photographs, documents, and a note written in block letters. Nancy Perez did not drown by accident. Check her husband's alibi. In her 13 years on the force, Mitchell had received many anonymous letters, most of which turned out to be the product of someone's sick imagination. But this package was different. The photos of the scene at Silver Lake contained a detailed analysis, clearly done by a professional. They pointed out inconsistencies in Ross Perez's story. His footprints led away from the water, not toward it. There were signs of a struggle on the shore, and there were scratches on the rocks that didn't match the story of an accidental fall. "Damn," she muttered as she studied the materials. That same morning, Ross Perez received another message. This time it was a photo of himself taken the night before through the living room window. On the back was written, "I'm watching. I remember. You'll pay soon." "Amanda!" his cry echoed through the house. His wife was coming down the stairs with 2-year-old Lucas in her arms. At 23, she looked older, tired eyes, slumped shoulders, a nervous tick at her left temple. Motherhood and 4 years of marriage to Ross had aged her. "What's wrong?" she said quietly, trying not to wake her son. "Who was in the house last night?" "No one, just us." Ross showed her the photo. Amanda turned pale. "Who could have done this?" "I don't know." He clenched his fists. "But I'll find out." For the past few weeks, he had been haunted by the feeling that he was being watched. A shadow in the rearview mirror, movement outside the window, phone calls with no answer on the other end. At first, he had dismissed it as paranoia, but now he had proof. "Maybe we should call the police," Amanda suggested. "No!" he shouted so sharply that Lucas started crying. "No police!" Amanda automatically began to rock her son, accustomed to her husband's outbursts. "I'm sorry, I just thought... Don't think. This is my problem." He walked over to the window and pulled back the curtains. The street looked peaceful. Autumn maple trees, neat lawns, parked cars. But somewhere out there was someone who knew about his past, someone who could destroy his new life. At St. Mary's Hospital, Alice Johnson sorted medical bills in her small office in the administrative wing. None of her colleagues paid much attention to her, a quiet, efficient woman who did her job and didn't participate in office gossip. But today she was on edge. The first phase of the plan was underway. Detective Mitchell had obtained evidence, and Ross realized that his past was catching up with him. Now she had to turn up the pressure. During her lunch break, she drove downtown and stopped at Jimmy's Auto Service, Ross's main branch. The shop was busy. 3 lifts, several mechanics, the smell of motor oil and metal. "Can I help you?" A young employee behind the counter smiled at her. "I wanted to talk to Mr. Perez about the car." "Ross is in the shop. Wait a minute." A few minutes later, a familiar silhouette emerged from the depths of the workshop. 4 years had changed Ross. Gray hair, deep wrinkles around his eyes, extra weight. But his movements remained the same. confident, predatory. Nancy felt a familiar pang of fear but suppressed it. She was no longer a defenseless victim. Now she was the hunter. "You wanted to talk to me?" Ross wiped his hands on a dirty rag. "Yes, about the repairs." She spoke calmly, studying his face. No recognition. 4 years and a radical change in appearance had done the trick. "What kind of car do you drive?" "A 2018 Honda Civic, engine trouble." Ross took out his notepad. "Name? Alice Johnson." He wrote down the name without looking up. The irony of the moment was almost physically painful. A killer writing down the name of his victim, unaware of who stood before him. "Can you bring the car in tomorrow morning?" "Sure. How long have you been in this business?" "Over 20 years, he smiled proudly. "I started as an assistant. Now I own 3 branches." "Impressive. Your wife must be proud." Something changed in his expression. "My wife died 4 years ago, an accident." "I'm so sorry." Nancy paused. "But you remarried, didn't you? I saw the photos in the local newspaper." "Yes, my stepdaughter. We helped each other through the grief." Nancy felt nauseous, but she kept her face neutral. "I understand. Sometimes tragedy brings people together." "Exactly." He nodded. "See you tomorrow morning, Mrs. Johnson." Leaving the workshop, Nancy got into her car and just breathed for a few minutes. The first contact had been made. Ross didn't recognize her, but the seeds of suspicion had been sown. Over the next few days, she methodically increased the psychological pressure. Anonymous phone calls at 3 in the morning. When Ross picked up the phone, all he could hear was quiet breathing. Photos of his car in the parking lot outside the workshop with a note saying, "Nice car. Hope the brakes are working." Flowers on Nancy's grave with a note reading, "From the one who remembers the truth." Each message was designed to remind him of the past, make him nervous, and cause him to make mistakes. The effect exceeded expectations. Ross started drinking, first in the evenings, then during the day. His work at the workshop suffered. He snapped at his subordinates, and he paranoidly checked the locks and alarms. Amanda had it worst. Her husband's stress affected her twice as much. The bruises appeared more often, and the explanations became less and less plausible. "Did you fall down the stairs again?" asked the pediatrician, examining a scrape on Amanda's cheek during Lucas's routine checkup. "Yes, I've been so clumsy lately." Dr. Susan Wright had been working at the hospital for 15 years and had seen enough cases of domestic violence to recognize the signs. But Amanda stubbornly denied there was a problem, and without her statement, there was nothing she could do. In October, Detective Mitchell decided to talk to Ross informally. The anonymous evidence looked convincing, but 4 years was a long time to reopen an investigation. She needed new facts. "Mr. Perez, Detective Mitchell, Ridgewood Police. Can I ask you a few questions?" Ross froze in the doorway of his house. "About what?" "About the death of your first wife. We have some new information." "What information?" He let her into the house, trying to look calm. "An anonymous source sent us some material that makes us reconsider the accident theory." Amanda was sitting on the sofa in the living room with Lucas. She looked frightened. "Perhaps we should talk in private," Mitchell suggested. "Number Amanda can stay. We have no secrets." Mitchell took out photos of the crime scene. "Can you explain these discrepancies in your statements?" Ross studied the photos, his hands shaking slightly. "I don't understand. Everything happened exactly as I told you. According to the forensic report, the marks on the shore indicate a struggle, and your fingerprints lead away from the water, not toward it." "Forensic report? What forensic report? Who did that?" "We can't reveal our sources, but the information appears to be reliable." Amanda stared at her husband with wide eyes. For the first time in 4 years, she was hearing that her mother's death might not have been an accident. "This is nonsense." Ross stood up and began pacing the room. "Someone is trying to frame me. Do you have any idea who it might be?" "No, I loved Nancy. I tried to save her." "Then you won't mind if we reopen the investigation?" There was a long pause. Ross knew that refusing would look suspicious. "Of course, do whatever you want." After the detective left, Amanda asked a direct question for the first time in years. Ross, did you really try to save Mom? He turned to her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her cringe with fear. Are you doubting me? No, The blow landed on her left cheek, knocking her back onto the couch. Lucas began to cry. Never ask me that again, Ross growled. Never! Amanda pressed her hand to her burning cheek, rocking her crying son. But for the first time in 4 years, there was not only fear in her eyes, but also doubt. That same evening, Nancy received a message from Dr. Grant. The police have launched an investigation. Amanda went to the emergency room today with a bruised face. I think it's time to move on to the final stage. She agreed. The psychological pressure had achieved its goal. Ross was losing control, making mistakes, becoming dangerous. A little more, and he could have seriously hurt Amanda or Lucas. Playtime was over. It was time to take her family home. The next day, Alice Johnson didn't show up for work at the hospital. Her colleagues assumed she was sick. In fact, Nancy Perez was preparing for her resurrection and for her final meeting with her husband, who thought he had killed her 4 years ago. November 2023. It was a cold and rainy November night, just like 4 years ago at Silver Lake. Nancy stood in the shadows of the trees near her former home on Maple Street, watching the lit windows. She could see the silhouettes of Ross and Amanda in the living room. Her daughter was holding Lucas in her arms, trying to calm him down, while Ross paced nervously around the room with his phone to his ear. Yes, I understand it's late, he said into the phone, but I need protection. Someone is following me. The private investigator he had hired a month ago was clearly not living up to his expectations. Anonymous messages continued to arrive, and their source remained unknown. Nancy checked the time on her phone. 11:47 p.m. It was almost midnight. 4 years ago, at this time, she was fighting for her life in the icy waters of the lake. It was symbolic that today, of all days, she would return from the dead. She took the last message for Ross out of her pocket, an envelope with a single sentence. The lake remembers. Midnight. Come alone, or tomorrow everyone will know the truth about Amanda. Inside was a photo of their wedding and a copy of Lucas's birth certificate with a note. What will the police say when they find out how you took care of her after my death? She walked over to the mailbox and dropped the envelope inside. 10 minutes later, Ross went out to check the mail, a habit he had developed over the past few weeks. Finding the letter, he opened it right there on the porch. Even in the dark, Nancy could see him turn pale. Ross returned to the house, and soon the light in the living room went out. He went up to the bedroom where Amanda had already put Lucas to bed. What's wrong? She asked, noticing his shock. Nothing. Just go to bed. Ross, you look terrible. Maybe you should talk to someone? A psychologist? He turned sharply toward her. I said nothing. Amanda recoiled, instinctively covering her face with her hands. In 4 years, she had learned to read his moods, to anticipate his outbursts of anger. I'm sorry, he forced himself to calm down. Just a lot of stress at work. She nodded, not believing a word he said. Ever since Detective Mitchell had asked questions about her mother's death, Amanda couldn't stop thinking about it. Little things she had ignored before now added up to a disturbing picture. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Ross quietly got out of bed and got dressed. Amanda pretended to be asleep, but watched him through half-closed eyes. He took the gun from the nightstand, the same one he had bought after the stalking began. Where are you going? She couldn't help asking. To work. Problems with the alarm. Another lie. But Amanda said nothing, clutching the photo of her mother, which she had secretly kept under her mattress, to her chest. Silver Lake greeted Ross with its familiar silence. The place was deserted. Who in their right mind would come here in this weather? He parked in the same spot he had 4 years ago and walked to the shore. The rain was getting heavier, turning the path into a muddy mess. Ross clutched the handle of his gun in his pocket, peering into the darkness. Whoever was behind these messages, today it would all end. You came! A voice from the darkness made him jump. A female figure materialized from behind the trees, tall, slender, wearing a dark hooded cloak. Her face was hidden in the shadows. "Who are you?" Ross drew his gun. "What do you want?" "I want justice." She took a step forward. "I want you to pay for what you did." "What? What are you talking about?" "You know what I'm talking about." Her voice was strangely familiar, but Ross couldn't place it. 4 years ago, right here. It was an accident. The woman laughed, a bitter, painful laugh. "An accident? You strangled me. You held me underwater until I stopped fighting. You said you could comfort my daughter now." The blood drained from Ross's veins. "That's impossible." She raised her hands and pulled back her hood. Rain streamed down her face, but her features were recognizable, even if changed by the years. "Hello, Ross. Did you miss me?" Nancy Perez stood before him, alive, real, with hatred in her eyes. "You're dead." He stepped back. "I killed you. You tried, but as you can see, not very successfully." Ross raised the gun with trembling hands. "That's impossible. You were cremated." "A convenient lie. Dr. Grant was more observant than you expected. 4 years you were alive for 4 years and you didn't go back to your daughter?" Nancy took another step forward. "I wanted to. Every day I wanted to, but I knew you'd kill us both. I had to wait for the right moment. So it was all you, the letters, the phone calls. It was fun watching you go crazy, watching you get paranoid, drink, take it out on my daughter." Her voice was icy. "How does it feel to live in fear, Ross? To know that someone could destroy your life?" "You don't understand," he said, still holding the gun. "Amanda loves me. We're happy." Nancy laughed even louder. "Happy? You beat her. You control her every move. You forced her to marry you while she was still reeling from grief." "I saved her. I gave her a home, a family. You ruined her life, just like you tried to ruin mine." Ross felt reality slipping away from him. For 4 years, he had built a new life on the foundation of murder, and now that foundation was crumbling. "What do you want?" he growled. "I want my daughter and my grandson. I want you to pay for everything you've done." "Never! Amanda is mine! Lucas is my son!" "Lucas is my grandson, and Amanda was never yours. You stole her from me." Ross realized that negotiation was pointless. The only way to save his life was to kill Nancy again, this time for sure. "I'm sorry," he raised the gun, "but you've been dead for 4 years. It's time to fix that." The shot echoed across the lake, but it wasn't the person Ross was expecting to fall. Detective Sarah Mitchell stepped out from behind the trees, a smoking gun in her hands. "Police! Drop your weapon!" Ross, wounded in the shoulder, fell to his knees, dropping the gun. "How did you get here?" "Doctor," Grant warned me. Mitchell approached him, keeping her weapon at the ready. "He told me the whole truth an hour ago." Nancy took a voice recorder out of her pocket. "It's all on tape. A confession to murder, threats. Enough for life in prison." Ross Perez is charged with the attempted murder of Nancy Perez in November 2019. Mitchell read his rights. "You have the right to remain silent." While the detective called for backup and an ambulance, Nancy stood over her ex-husband. "I've been preparing for this moment for 4 years, she said quietly. 4 years planning your death. But you know what? Life in prison is the worst fate. You'll rot behind bars, knowing that Amanda and Lucas are free." Ross looked at her with hatred and despair. "She'll never forgive you. 4 years of lies." "Maybe, but that's my sin, not yours, and I'm willing to bear it." Half an hour later, the scene was swarming with police and medics. Ross was taken to the hospital under guard, and Nancy gave a detailed account of the events of 4 years ago. "What now?" Mitchell asked. "Now I need to talk to my daughter." The drive home seemed endless to Nancy. How could she explain to Amanda that her mother had been alive for 4 years? How could she apologize for the pain she had caused? How could she regain her trust? All the windows were lit up at the house on Maple Street. Amanda was awake. Her maternal instinct told her something was wrong. She was rocking Lucas, who was crying, when she heard footsteps on the porch. "Ross?" she called, thinking her husband had returned. The door opened, and a figure in a wet raincoat appeared in the doorway. "Not Ross." The voice made Amanda freeze. The woman pulled back her hood, and Amanda saw the face she had dreamed of every night for 4 years. "Mom?" The whisper was almost silent. "Hello, sweetheart." Lucas slipped out of Amanda's weakened arms, but Nancy caught him. The boy looked at the stranger with curious eyes, just like his mother's when he was a child. "How dead you were at the funeral." "It's a long story." Nancy reached out to her daughter. "Can I explain?" Amanda recoiled. 4 years! 4 years I thought you were dead! 4 years crying at your grave! "I know, and I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" Amanda screamed. "Do you know what I went through? How he—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but Nancy understood. "I know what he did to you. I watched. I gathered evidence." "You watched? And you didn't stop him?" "I couldn't. If I'd shown up earlier, he would have killed us both." Amanda sat down on the sofa, covering her face with her hands. "This is a nightmare. This can't be true." Nancy sat down next to her, holding Lucas in her arms. The boy calmed down, as if recognizing his mother's blood. "Ross will never come home," she said softly. "He's in jail. He confessed to attempted murder." "Attempted? So he really—" "Yes, he tried to kill me because of you." Amanda raised her head, her eyes filled with tears. "Because of me? He wanted you, and I stood in his way." The next few hours were spent in painful explanations. Nancy told her the whole truth about the attempted murder, about being saved by Dr. Grant, about 4 years of living in secret and planning her revenge. Amanda listened in shock, anger, and despair. "How could you?" she repeated. "How could you let me live with him, have his child? Because I loved you, because I wanted you to live, even if it meant my suffering. That's not love. That's selfishness." Maybe her daughter was right. Maybe Nancy really did choose revenge over saving her daughter. But now it was too late for regrets. Epilogue. June 2024. Ross Perez's trial lasted 3 months. The evidence was irrefutable. Recorded confessions, medical records of Amanda's injuries, witness testimony. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Nancy was officially resurrected. New documents, a restored identity, compensation from the state for mistakes in the investigation. But the most important battle was the fight for her daughter's forgiveness. Amanda did not speak to her for 6 months. She moved with Lucas to an apartment across town, changed her last name back to Thompson, and began therapy with a psychologist. The trust had been so thoroughly destroyed that it seemed irreparable. But children have an amazing capacity for forgiveness. Lucas, who was 3 years old, fell in love with Grandma Nancy almost immediately. It was through her grandson that a slow reconciliation began. "He looks like you at that age," Nancy said on one of the rare days when Amanda allowed her to visit them. "Don't say that." Amanda was still cold. "He's the son of a murderer. He's your son, and my grandson. Children are not responsible for the sins of their parents." Gradually, very slowly, the wall between them began to crumble. Family therapy helped them find their way back to each other. Amanda realized that her mother was also a victim, and Nancy accepted that her choices had caused her daughter no less pain than Ross's actions. A year later, they were living together again, not in the old house on Maple Street, where there were too many painful memories, but in a new one on the other side of town. Nancy worked as a coordinator for a domestic violence support program. Amanda went back to college to study social work. Lucas went to kindergarten and grew up a happy child with no memory of the dark days with Ross. Sometimes Nancy thought about what might have been if she had chosen a different path. If she had come back right away, openly challenged Ross, and trusted the law to take care of him. But you can't change the past. You can only learn from your mistakes. Justice prevailed, but at what cost? 4 years of lost life, broken trust, and wounds that would never fully heal. Revenge turned out to be an expensive pleasure. But looking at the smiling Lucas, at Amanda's slowly healing wounds, at her own hands, no longer trembling with fear, Nancy knew one thing. Some battles are worth any price, and a mother's love is the strongest force in the world. Ross Perez spent the rest of his life in an Ohio state prison. He died in 2031 of a heart attack, never repenting for what he had done. No one came to his funeral. Nancy Perez lived to be 90, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. The words, Mother, protector, fighter for justice. She never gave up, are engraved on her gravestone. The story of the Perez family became a legend in Ridgewood, a reminder that the dead sometimes return, that the truth always comes out, and that a mother's love is stronger than death.